So this video is sort of a new thing that I'm trying on the channel. I say sort of because I did actually do something very similar to this a while ago. This was back when I first started and when I was attempting to figure out exactly what I wanted to make. The issue was that I didn't really have much of an audience back then, but now with around 3,500 of you subscribed to the channel, I decided to give it another try. I've had a lot of you ask me at various times what I'm playing or what I'm up to outside of my videos, so I thought it made sense to put this kind of video together. On top of that, it uses up a lot of the footage that may have otherwise gone to waste, and it gives you all something else to watch. I should also say that this isn't meant to be a collection of mini reviews or anything like that, so just to set expectations, I won't be diving into the finer details of every game that I show, but I will for some. This is a more casual look at some of the stuff that I've been playing lately, and you never know, you might find something interesting that you'd like to play for yourself. I don't really have a schedule in mind for when I'll release videos like this in the future, but you will see them pop up here and there as I play more games in my spare time. This is actually the longest and most involved piece of content that I've ever made, so please do bear with me if something doesn't seem quite right. And while we're on that subject, feedback of any kind would be greatly appreciated. Thankfully, next time I won't need to explain all of this, but I wanted to do it here because this is somewhat of a new thing for me. But with all of that said and out of the way, let's take a look at the games I'm playing. So first up, I really wanted to talk about Kingdoms of Amalur, specifically the remaster which released in March of 2021. Right up front, I'm just going to say that this may actually be my favourite action RPG of all time, and I don't say that lightly. I have loved and enjoyed this game since its very first outing on the PS3 and the Xbox 360 in 2012, and I've beaten it multiple times. I don't know what it is about it, I really don't. It just kinda ticks all of the boxes for me, and it's got that special something, that X factor that's really hard to describe. Now obviously I don't expect everyone else out there to enjoy this as much as me, or even like it at all for that matter. I'm just saying that for me, it's an exceptional game that I simply can't get enough of. I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I will admit that it's far from perfect, regardless of how much I happen to like it. But before we get into all of that, let's start at the beginning. Kingdoms of Amalur: Re-Reckoning is a 2021 remaster of the original 2012 action RPG. As a slightly upscaled port, it looks and runs fine on PS4, but I've been playing it on PS5 where it received a patch that allows it to run at native 4K and 60 FPS. A nice addition is that all versions of the game come with all previously released DLC content, which includes 2 sizable expansions and some special in-game items. As part of the remastering process, a third and brand new DLC was created and released 9 months later. This DLC was called Fatesworn, and again it's a decently sized expansion with large new areas, a 15 to 20 hour story and lots of side content to engage with. It was and is sold as a separate downloadable purchase though. It seems to be about £16 in the UK as standard, so I would imagine it would cost something like $20 in the US. Funnily enough, I've only just recently picked up the new Fatesworn expansion and played through it. And I suppose you might be wondering why that is. You know, why didn't I get the DLC on day one? Well, the reason is that the entire remaster was pretty much broken on launch, and frankly, I just didn't think they deserved my money. It's as simple as that, although I was kinda upset at the time. Still though, I struggled through the crashes, the poor performance, the bugs, the glitches, and I managed to finish the remaster, but I chose not to reward them with a DLC purchase. And on top of that, I reluctantly sold the main game as well. Fast forward to now, which is October 2022, and I randomly thought to myself, I wonder if they've ever patched that game and fixed all the problems, not knowing that a patch had actually been released. Luckily for me, I own the remaster digitally as part of my PS Plus subscription, so it didn't really cost me anything to jump back in and try it out. And you know, from the moment I booted it up, it felt like a whole different game in the best possible way. It runs and plays so much better now, and it's literally a night and day difference. The 4K resolution really makes everything pop, and the 60 FPS gameplay feels great. I did also look up some specific settings in the options menu in regards to things like the camera and field of view, and I managed to make everything feel even smoother by doing so. In fact, I know some of you out there were chatting to me about this game in the comments before, so this next bit will probably be important for you. What I'm showing you here is the settings that I went with for my tastes and needs. Obviously you're free to tweak it to your own liking, but I would suggest using my settings that you can see here for camera and controls as a sort of baseline to work from. Please feel free to screenshot these menus if you want, or just come back to the video when the time comes. The story of the game is based around all mortal creatures having a predetermined fate or destiny. In the game's limited but perfectly serviceable character creator, you can choose how you look from a small set of options, and then you can select your race and choose a god to worship. The race and god options give you a few free points in certain skills and some passive effects respectively. Your character very quickly becomes known as the Fateless One, a being who isn't shackled to any specific fate and also has the power to alter the fates of those around them. I'll let you discover the rest of the narrative on your own, but trust me when I say there is a lot of lore and backstory to learn and uncover. Being honest, I don't think it's what you'd call revolutionary, but in my opinion, it's solid fantasy. A lot of the story and the lore was written by R.A. Salvatore, who's quite a famous author, and there's also a ton of visual elements in the game that were produced by Todd McFarlane, who you might know as the creator of Spawn. Also, if I'm not mistaken, the game's design and overall structure was put together by the lead designer of The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind and The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. They really did have quite the roster for this one, didn't they? And you know, I can't help but feel like these three gentlemen played a huge part in elevating this game from generic fantasy to what I've consistently considered an underrated gem. I've always referred to this game privately as the best RPG that no one's playing, which I think seems pretty accurate. So what's the gameplay like? Well, I suppose I'd call it relatively simplistic but notably fun, especially where combat is concerned. The land that you traverse is actually a semi-open world and works in much the same way as the Borderlands series. It's essentially lots of large individual areas divided by some very brief loading screens. There's a huge amount of dungeons, castles and side areas to explore as well. Not to mention that the towns have a ton of buildings and houses, each with their own detailed interiors, NPCs and vendors. I think some areas do feel a little bit sparse and empty, but at the same time they sort of aren't, which does sound kinda odd, but it's true. There's almost always something to find no matter where you go, like a new side quest, loot, or a group of enemies to dispose of. As you might expect, completing quests and killing enemies grants XP that levels up your character, and that unlocks skill points and new abilities. Skill points can be spent on this screen here, and as you can see, it's got the standard fantasy RPG stuff you'd expect, like persuasion, lockpicking, mercantile, etc, etc. And there's also some milestones built into each of these skill lines, which give you even more bonuses. Ability points fall into three categories, which are Might, Sorcery, and Finesse. Might is your typical sword-wielding warrior stuff, Sorcery is magic and elemental based, while Finesse uses ranged attacks, traps, and stealth. Each of these classes are absolutely viable and great on their own, but they can all be mixed and matched in pretty much any way you want. Want to be half Sorcery, half Might? You can do that. Want to be a bit of all three? You can do that. Want 90% Might but to dip your toe into Sorcery? You can do that as well. Depending on which way you go and where you spend your points, you'll actually unlock destiny cards which provide buffs and abilities to your chosen path. So if you put all of your points into Might, you'll be unlocking nothing but Might cards, for example. And these will focus on, physical damage, blocking, armor, things like that. The same is true if you decide to go for, let's say, Might and Sorcery like I have here. You'll unlock hybrid destiny cards that benefit both sets of skills. You can only have one destiny card equipped at a time, but you're not locked into anything and you can respec at a Fate Weaver at any time for a small amount of gold. I've always loved this system, and the fact that you can walk the line between 2 or even 3 classes is very cool indeed. All of that class stuff leads directly into the moment-to-moment combat. Kingdoms of Amalur gives you the ability to have 2 weapons equipped at any time, no more, no less. On the PlayStation, that means one weapon is on square and the other is on triangle. And this is where the hybrid classes could come into play if you wanted to. If you were to go pure Might, you could use a longsword and a greatsword while taking the longsword and greatsword mastery abilities, which increases their damage output and unlocks new moves. However, if you were to go half Might and half Sorcery, you could take the longsword mastery and the scepter mastery abilities from the Might tree and Sorcery tree respectively. This would allow you to use physical warrior style weapons and ranged magic weapons at the same time. As you can see, this is a very flexible system and really does allow you to play the game however you want to. The combos and attacks that you use during combat are pretty simple, to be honest. I mean, yeah, there's a few moves that you can pull off with simple button inputs and you can hold down the right trigger to access your spells at any time, but I think it's the kinetic nature of everything that makes the game so hard to put down. The simple act of just hitting the enemies is very satisfying and, dare I say, kind of addictive. There's just a certain flow to each fight, and I have to point out that Amalur has one of the most fun to use parry systems I've ever encountered. It's definitely quite forgiving, and if I'm being fair, it's probably a little bit too easy to execute, but my god is it fun to do. You simply press the left trigger to bring up your shield just before getting hit. It knocks all the enemies away and gives you a chance to counterattack. It can't parry everything in the game because some things just have to be blocked or dodged, but it can parry the vast majority of the enemy's attacks. And as for negatives, I think there is a couple of things I could mention. Firstly, I think the game can feel a bit outdated at times, and that's simply because we have much better ways of dealing with certain game mechanics and systems nowadays. I'd say this is most obvious in the menus and the maps. The maps really aren't too bad, but the inventory screens can get a tad annoying. They're just a bit, I guess, cumbersome to navigate because literally everything you own is put into one giant list. I mean, sure, yes, they are sectioned off with headings and drop downs, but it would have worked so much better if it was, I don't know, something like a radial menu or something like that. The way that Diablo 3 does it, for example, would be ideal, I think. Some of you might not know this, but Kingdoms of Amalur was originally designed as an MMO, but somewhere along the way, it was scaled back to be a single-player action RPG. And some of those MMO leftovers can still be felt within the game, and none more so than the quest structure. It's almost always go here and find this item, or go here and kill this thing. It's definitely kind of bland, I guess, in terms of quest content, but the lore and combat are what kept me personally invested in the game for such a long time. So overall, it's really hard for me not to recommend this game to anyone who enjoys RPGs, but then again, I do have an obvious bias. I think the worst thing you'll encounter, especially on PS5, is some slightly outdated mechanics and some very minor visual oddities. I suppose I can't promise that you'll love it like I do, especially if you didn't play it back in the day, but I think it holds up well enough and could absolutely be enjoyed today. It's really easy and cheap to get hold of on all modern consoles, both physically and digitally, so yeah, give this one a try if you can. Okay, so this is Forager. It's been around since 2019 when it arrived on PC, and then a few months later it became available for consoles and phones. Recently the missus decided to pick up a physical copy for herself because it was only like £6 on Amazon here in the UK, which I think would be around $9 or $10 in the US, something like that. I'm sure you've seen this game in various sales and on different storefronts, but how many of you have actually sat down and played it? Well, I realized I was one of those people who'd seen it everywhere but never really looked at what it actually was. So as the missus was playing something else at the time, I borrowed the disc to give it a try. And I have to say, I had a lot of fun with Forager. In fact, I played it solidly over 4 or 5 days in order to beat it. I think the reason I enjoyed it so much was because of how simple and streamlined it all is. It's very much a case of pick up and play. Literally everything you do in the game, from mining to crafting to harvesting, all grants you XP. That XP levels you up and gives you a skill point which can be spent on this large grid that's full of upgrades. The upgrades that you purchase on that grid govern what you can then build and produce. When you consider that everything you do grants XP and the fact that resources regenerate very quickly, it creates this super tight and speedy gameplay loop. You're basically just running around hitting things, gathering things, and building things, but as I said, the way it's presented makes it incredibly compelling to engage with. I genuinely found it hard to put it down, which is why I couldn't help but play it every day until I beat it. Visually, it's not exactly a looker, I don't think. What it is though is appropriate for the genre. I mean, considering the way it works, I can't really imagine it looking any different. Could everything in the game be 3D models instead of pixel art? Yeah, probably, but I think it would lose some of its charm if that were the case. I'm aware that not everyone is into pixel art and retro style games, but as I've said before, I've always been a fan of it, having grown up in the 16-bit era. Pixel art can definitely get samey if it's not done very well, but that said, despite being just pixel art, I think the game does manage to craft its own identity. As you progress through the game, you'll be able to buy more land, which will essentially create new islands and biomes for you to explore. There's usually something important on each one of these islands to engage with, and that can include this game's main dungeons. Clearing these dungeons and defeating the bosses within is your main path to seeing the credits roll, although you can do virtually anything you want before taking them on. There's some minor puzzles to solve in certain areas which I'm not really a fan of, but they aren't exactly difficult and there really isn't many of them anyway. While the gameplay loop is generally geared up to be quick, you can just go and do whatever you want for as long as you want. It might feel like you're being pushed towards doing certain things, and I guess you kind of are, but you aren't punished for not doing those things or putting them off for a while if you so choose. One cool thing is that most of the gathering and harvesting can later be automated, freeing you up to do things at your own pace, and that's a good thing because early in the game, you'll be scrounging for food to stave off hunger. However, you quickly gain access to water traps that can catch fish for you over time, and you can even unlock the ability to automatically add the fish to your inventory, eliminating the need for you to pick them up yourself. There really are so many different options and craftable items in the game that it would take forever to explain them all, but I suppose the main point to take away with you is that the game always feels like you're achieving something. No matter what it is you're doing or how small the task may be, you're constantly progressing, which is a great feeling. I think this one might be a slightly harder sell for a lot of players because it's probably not what you're used to. This game seems to fall in line with things like Minecraft, Stardew Valley, Harvest Moon, and as popular as those games are, they are still pretty niche if you look at the bigger picture. That said, I do recommend this one, and if you're interested in it, it's yet another game that's readily available and cheap to buy. So this is Destiny 2, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. Everyone knows what it is and how it works, so I won't waste your time with any of that stuff today. I have been playing a lot of it recently though, after a 9-month break that is, and I'm mostly happy with where it is right now. I've actually been playing Destiny since the open beta of Destiny 1, and that was in 2014. I don't know how much time I spent in Destiny 1 overall, but using the Wasted on Destiny website, I can see that I've played about 1,430 hours in Destiny 2, and I have just short of 370 hours on characters that I ended up deleting, so yeah, it's kind of scary when you think about it like that. The funny thing is, I've consistently played the game solo except for the odd occasion. You can see here in the stats that I've played story content 71% of the time, and then I do strikes and multiplayer when I have to. I don't play Gambit anymore because, frankly, it's the most rage-inducing piece of crap that I've ever played in my entire life, and I've never actually completed a raid. I believe I've played in 2 of the game's raids, but it was such a miserable experience, so I've never really gone back to them. I just don't like the mechanics of it all. The best part of Destiny to me is the gunplay and of course feeling like some sort of powerful space wizard, but the raids force you to engage with these complicated, arbitrary systems that just end up being annoying, and at this point I have zero interest in playing any of them ever again. The standard gameplay outside of the hardcore pinnacle content has always been fun to me, and that's because the first-person shooting is frankly some of the best in the business, at least as far as I'm concerned. The weapons feel great to use, and a lot of the loot looks pretty cool as well. There's so many customization options and viable ways to build your character, especially in PvE. I don't play much in the way of PvP unless I have to, and my character isn't really set up for it, but you know, I do my best, and if I lose in a multiplayer match, then so be it. I don't exactly play to win in the multiplayer matches, if you know what I mean, but I am sometimes at the top of my team, so I guess I get lucky on some occasions. This is my main character, by the way. I pretty much always play a Titan because I like their chunky armor and the almost knightly look that they have. And I could go into the monetization of the game, which believe me isn't great, but to be honest, I could just say a flat out blanket statement of please don't engage with it. The large content-filled expansions are one thing, but nowadays they insist on putting the coolest stuff behind real-life cash, and that bothers me. The issue for me is that the game wasn't always this way. I used to enjoy collecting all of the cosmetics every season, but nowadays I'm lucky to get 1 or even 2 of them. It is really annoying, but sadly it's par for the course at this point. I've actually been playing a lot of the Halloween event lately, and I was really looking forward to earning this Gundam-themed armor for my Titan, but wouldn't you know it, you can only get that armor by spending real money at the Eververse. Destiny has always been about the grind, so I just don't see why they couldn't include some sort of grindy option for obtaining the armor. I'm only joking, of course, I'm not that naive, I know exactly why it's done this way, and unfortunately, it's pretty typical. Besides that though, the Halloween event has been pretty fun. I hear it's virtually the same as last year, but I went on my break from the game just before that at that time, so this is all new to me. You basically need to earn spectral pages from public events or other activities, then head into the Haunted Lost sectors. The haunted lost sectors are kind of like mini dungeons and you can matchmake into them, and clearing them turns your spectral pages into manifested pages. You then take those pages to the hub area of the game, which is called the tower, and you turn them in. As you do all of this, you'll be collecting event gear and trying to get the best rolls in terms of stats and perks. So, you know, it's not the best thing in the world, but as usual, the simple act of shooting stuff in the game carries my enjoyment. Destiny 2 is kinda hard to recommend, as you really need to be a certain type of player or person to enjoy it. And I think to get the most out of it, you'll need to have a dedicated team of players and a lot of time to spare, which most players, including me, don't have. That said, the core of the game is free to play now, so considering how fun the shooting mechanics are, you could perhaps download the free to play section and just see how you get on with it. This last game is one that I haven't spent much time with yet, but so far I think it's alright. It's not groundbreaking by any stretch of the imagination, but still it seems decent. This is The Witch and the 100 Knights, specifically the enhanced port for PS4 known as the Revival Edition. It's an action RPG with what I'd call a minor loot system. It does have loot drops, loot chests and all that kind of stuff, but there isn't much of it. You don't get loads of boots, chest pieces, gloves or anything like that. It's limited to weapons, accessories and a few other basic items and consumables. You play as the 100 Knight, who is kind of like a familiar that the witch has summoned to aid her in taking over the world. She refers to herself as the Witch of the Swamp, and funnily enough, she's magically unable to leave the swamp that she lives in. Luckily though, she can use the 100 Knight to explore the world and to make these special pillars bloom. Once a pillar blooms, it covers the surrounding area in swampland, which in turn spreads the witch's area of influence. This means that she can move further out into the world and increase the size of her domain. I think I've only played about 4, maybe 5 hours of the game so far, but that seems to be the gist of the story at this stage. Gameplay wise, I think it looks more complex than it actually is, especially when you look at this battle screen here. It's mostly your standard top-down action RPG formula from what I can tell, although the weapon system is kind of interesting. You can equip up to 5 weapons at once and you can switch between 3 sets of 5 weapons. I've only got 1 set of 5 weapons at the moment, but I'd assume you'd use this system to counter enemies who resist certain types of attacks or damage. The amount of weapons you have equipped govern how many hits there are in your attack combo. So if you have 3 weapons equipped, you attack 3 times before stopping. Each hit in that combo will actually be from the weapon you have equipped in that slot, so I'd imagine later on you'll be able to create some really potent weapon sets. Each weapon also has a number attached to it which goes from 1 to 5, and for some reason I can't remember what that number's called right now. It's something like talisman numbers or something, but whatever. The point is you basically want to have weapons that go from 1 to 5 equipped because it provides a damage bonus when you set it up like that. The number's located to the right of where it says type, and it's the little symbol with the yellow dots on it. Ideally, you'd want the weapon in slot 1 to have 1 yellow dot, and then the weapon in slot 2 to have 2 yellow dots, and so on. Any weapons that you equip in number sequence will get the bonus, so it's always worth checking it when you can. Each time you venture out into the world, it works a little bit like starting a run in a roguelike game. The large number located at the top left, which counts down, dictates how far you can explore in one run, before you need to head back to the swamp to recover and manage your character's inventory. The number basically drains as you explore, and I think it's done this way to stop you from farming one area over and over for XP, as the enemies do respawn pretty quickly in this game. But yeah, it's got a lot of RPG systems, stats to ponder over, boss fights, and some sections which play out like short visual novels. There's a few other mechanics that I've not really done much with so far, like raiding villagers' houses for loot, but I guess I'll learn about them as I progress. Overall, I'd say that I'm enjoying it so far. I can't say that it's properly hooked me yet, so I won't 100% recommend this, but it does seem pretty good from what I've played. I think it's relatively easy to find a physical copy of this, but if you just want to try it out, it's actually free on PS Plus Extra right now, so maybe that's an option for you. I believe there's also a sequel out there for it, so I'll have to look into that at some point as well. But yeah, if this one looks interesting to you in any way, please do give it a try. So there you go, that's just some of the games I've been playing recently. I've got a long list of stuff that I'd like to play for review, which takes me from, I think, the rest of October all the way through to January 1st, so that'll definitely keep me busy. If you have any suggestions of games that you've enjoyed that you'd like me to play, go ahead and leave those down in the comments below. I can't promise that I'll play them all, obviously, but I'll absolutely look them up and check them out. Lastly, this is one of, if not the longest video that I've ever done on this channel, and it took me way longer to create than I initially expected. That said, I think I have a good handle on it all now, and I appreciate you all sticking with the channel as I learn to do all of this stuff. Writing, speaking, and editing don't really come natural to me, and I'm my own worst critic, so it's a nice feeling when you guys enjoy what I make. Oh, and as I said at the start, if you have any thoughts or feedback on this specific video, I would definitely like to hear it, regardless of if it's good or bad. If you enjoy the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.